นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. In a few days we will celebrate Asalaha Puja, the full moon day, when historically the Buddha gave his first teaching, Dhamma Chakkappawattana Sutta, and following that, they say the Dhamma eye arose for Venerable Kondanya, so he became known as Anya Kondanya, the first disciple, student of the Buddha. So it's a very special day in the life of the Buddha. So after his own enlightenment experience, it was that first occasion where he taught the Dhamma, explained the Four Noble Truths, that somebody understood Kondanya. So there was the exclamation, Kondanya knows. Which kind of verified what the Buddha had known, and then was able to teach the 5 ascetics in the deer park in Benares. It proved that this teaching works because Venerable Kondanya also experienced clear insight at that time. He wasn't yet fully enlightened. He attained the first stage of enlightenment, so Sotapanna, stream entra, where he saw through the delusion of Sakkaya Ditthi, what we call personality view, the view that these 5 khandhas, body, feelings, perceptions, thought formations, and sense consciousness are self. That view disappeared, and with it the attachment to external habits and practices with wrong view, and doubt and uncertainty in the Buddha's own enlightenment and the path, the Dhamma that leads to enlightenment. That all was removed from his mind with that insight. And he became the first student of the Buddha, you could say the first Buddhist monk in the world. And from then onwards, many others also started to follow the Buddha, practice what he taught, became enlightened, and took ordination as monks, and then later as nuns, and then lay followers, men and women, upasikas, also committed to following the path of the Buddha. In those days, when somebody had enough faith to declare that they would follow the Buddha and his teachings, and he'd invite them to become a monk. They didn't have much in terms of ceremony or procedure. The Buddha would say, Ehi bhikkhu. They call it Ehi bhikkhu upasampada. You just say, come, become a monk for the ending of suffering. So a very simple way to become a Buddhist monk. Nowadays we have a much more elaborate process because the Sangha has grown over the centuries. So you need a preceptor, or an upajjhaya, and a quorum of monks, a Sangha of monks. And you have what we call a motion and 3 announcements. A ceremony to admit a candidate into the Sangha, and they have to be checked first. They have to be checked to see if they're suitable to become a Buddhist monk. But in the early days, there was very little ceremony because the Buddha in his wisdom could see, I guess, who was ready to become a monk, and certainly if somebody had deep insight like Venerable Kondanya, then a lot of their mental defilements dropped away at that moment, so their mind became much more radiant, peaceful, and that's reflected in their conduct. They say a Sotapanna quite naturally keeps the 5 precepts, and they've got the qualities we call hiri, otapa, established in the mind. So they have a sense of shame and fear of wrongdoing, what we often call a conscience, clear and very refined conscience, understanding of what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, and then acting accordingly, abandoning the unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome. So in the early days they didn't even have many rules for monks. Now we have what we call the patimokkha training, hundreds of rules, and then many other rules were laid down over the years, over the lifetime of the Buddha. A whole body of rules and procedures and practices that Buddhist monks have to follow to develop discipline and this clarity on what is wholesome and what is unwholesome for training the human mind towards Nibbana. And that's the purpose of the holy life, the life of an ordained monastic, is for realizing Nibbana. We call that the highest good. So it's a way of a human being can develop themselves, improve themselves, do the highest good as defined by the Buddha, an enlightened Buddha, a wise, enlightened Buddha. And the lifestyle of a monk is for that purpose. The rules we keep, the meditations we do, living simply in the forest is all for that purpose of cultivating this path, improving ourselves, doing the highest good to free our mind from suffering. Ajahn Chah, our teacher, used to say that if you're not yet able to become a monk or a nun, you can still practice this path, and you may not be able to go through the ordination procedure of shaving your head, putting on the robes yet, but you can ordain your heart. In Thai they say Bawat Jai. You ordain your heart as if your heart is the heart of a monk or a nun. Because this is a training or a practice that goes to the heart, the center of our being, this quality that knows, we say that which knows, needs to be trained, because the reason we suffer in life is because we know wrongly and mistakenly. We're under the influence of mental defilements, ignorance, unawareness, wrong views, and that's why we suffer. But we can ordain the heart, meaning we take on the practice, whether we're actually a monk or a nun or a lay person. We can ordain our heart and commit to following the path that the Buddha taught. That's what it is. It's a commitment. It's faith arises, some confidence that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. So maybe like most of us, we read the Dhamma, we hear the Dhamma, and we get some confidence and conviction that what the Buddha was saying is true, appears to be true as far as we understand. That gives us confidence to follow, to practice, put it into practice, to make that effort. And that's why you might say you can ordain your heart, meaning you take on the training in the Eightfold Noble Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, for the end of suffering. It's a commitment. Doesn't mean to say you're perfect. When we start the practice, we're not perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need to practice. We could just sit back and enjoy things without putting forth effort. But we're not perfect. We have what we call mental defilements affecting us. Greed, anger, delusion. Wrong views, wrong thinking. And the results of that is that we still get stressed and suffer and have internal conflicts and worries, and then we have external conflicts and problems with other people as well. So we need to commit and we need to practice. So the Buddha didn't expect us to be perfect yet when we start practicing. But we use what we have, this body and this mind and this commitment and conviction to train, to develop ourselves. So Ajahn Chah used to say, you're like a piece of wood from the forest when you start practicing. Any old piece of wood, just picked up, whether it's from a fallen tree or just a branch or something lying on the ground. You pick up that piece of wood and it's still full of all kinds of blemishes. It's got bark on it and knots and cracks and bits of dirt and gunk, resin, whatever. It's like a human being who begins the practice. We have our accumulated weaknesses and faults and attachments. So we need to work with our minds. Like that piece of wood, you need to take it to a workshop or some place, and then you get tools and you start working with it, scraping off the bark and the worst bits of gunk, and then smoothing it and turning it and sawing it and doing whatever you're going to do with it to turn it into a piece of wood that is something that's useful to be used as a piece of furniture or to make it into something. Could even make it into a Buddha statue if you wanted to. But it needs effort, it needs to be worked before it becomes something beautiful. And that's the purpose of this practice. Whether you're ordained on the outside and shave your head and wear the robes, or you ordain your heart but you're still living as a lay person in the world, it's a process. The practice is a process of rubbing away, wearing away, eroding away the rough edges of the mind that cause us all that conflict and suffering, until you get through to the smooth, the beautiful, through effort, through practice. And that's why there's only a few enlightened, awakened, fully awakened beings in the world, because it takes time and effort and commitment. But the more you listen to the Dhamma and reflect on it, you might get to the point where you realize there's really no other choice but to go in the direction that the Buddha encouraged us to go. The opposite direction is one of increasing our suffering in the world, increasing our attachments, our delusions, our anger, our greed, and then there's no end to suffering. But if we're honest, nobody in this life, in this world, wants to suffer. So if you've come in contact with the Buddha and his teachings, that's your great blessing. So you can start to follow and apply the wisdom of the Buddha and then develop the same qualities and discipline and commitment that the Buddha and his enlightened disciples developed for themselves already. And this is why learning to meditate takes time and effort for results to come for most people, because we've accumulated all kinds of negative habits, delusions, attachments that keep coming up to interrupt our good effort. Every time you meditate, you probably sit down with the wish, I'm going to make this mind peaceful, I'm going to let go of all my stress and everything that's bothering me. But so often, something comes up to block you, some obstacle, and that's where you've got to work, that's where you've got to put your effort in. And just like working with that bit of wood, it's not necessarily going to take just a little bit of effort. It might take repeated effort over time to really work with that bit of wood to turn it into something useful. So it's a frustrating, time-consuming process, but rewarding, especially the more you do it. And the older you get, you realize how quickly time passes in our lives. The days and nights whiz by. So if you use some of that time to train yourself and to develop the qualities of sila, morality, mindfulness, wisdom, insight, little by little it has a cumulative effect. And some of those obstacles and attachments and negative ways of thinking gradually do wear away, because we're seeing them over and over again. And once you get to see them, then you get tired of them. Really, the mind settles down and becomes more peaceful because we get tired of what is not peaceful. When you see something is causing you pain, stress, suffering over and over again, after a while you get the point. The mind knows that this is not the way to happiness. If I keep holding on to my greed, anger, delusion, keep identifying with the negative thoughts, the confusion, the worries, the anxieties, sooner or later you start to realize that this is very tiring and causing you stress. So then you want to drop it, let it go. That comes through repeated practice, over and over again, training yourself, looking and learning. It's not always easy because you're working with the things that are closest to this heart. We say ordain the heart, but then the things you're closest to are also the things that cause you suffering. We have an ego, a conceit, a self, and we attach to views and opinions. And some of them, even though they're painful, cause us suffering, and we're so used to them we don't want to drop them. And you see that when you practice. Sometimes we know a certain way of thinking or a certain habit or behavior pattern is a problem for us or a cause of suffering. We already know it, but we haven't yet got the sharpness or the clarity of mind to drop it. Maybe someone else tells us as well, and that's the value of teachers. So the Buddha told people who became monks and nuns with him, he said, I'm not going to treat you and sort of spoil you and make it all easy for you. I'm going to be pointing out where you're going wrong. Because in the beginning we often need the support of Kalyana Mitta, good friends, teachers to remind us. But over time you have to do it for yourself as well. One of those phrases Ajahn Chah used to use, Attano Joti Attanam. You have to learn how to teach yourself. Remind yourself of the Dhamma, remind yourself of the truth. So if you are going wrong and causing yourself stress, suffering, you have to remind yourself not to do that. To give it up, let it go. Whether it's some form of anger or selfishness, pride, jealousy, laziness, stubbornness, coming out in our speech or even just our thinking. Our aim is to keep observing and learning to see where suffering is coming from. And remind ourselves, teach ourselves to let it go, drop it. This is why the monastic life is so useful, because you're constantly seeing mental defilements come up over and over again. When you become a Buddhist monk, you shave your head, you have robes, you have a bowl, and that's it. You hardly have any possessions at all. You don't have an income, you don't have any property, you don't have a partner, kids. You just have yourself, your body and mind to train, to work with. So you can't help but notice the mental defilements when they start coming up. You have an alms bowl, so you go and receive alms food, bindabata. That's food that people are kind enough to share with you, but you don't choose what they share with you. So sometimes it's what you want, sometimes not. Sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. So Ajahn Chah used to say, you have to remind yourself, eat modestly, eat little, sleep little, talk little. This way you become very mindful, very aware of your mind, and you see these desires and cravings and attachments coming up. If you eat a lot, sleep a lot, talk a lot, you miss so much. One of the biggest ways we miss our defilements is we're just talking all the time. Socializing, talking. So then you don't see your mind so clearly. Eating the same. Sleeping. Obviously when we sleep we can't see our defilements. And often we sleep, some people sleep 8-9 hours a day. That's a third of your life spent sleeping. 8 hours a day, 24 hours in a day. So that's a third of your day is spent unconscious, unaware. So Ajahn Chah was always saying, arouse energy, effort. Chakaryana yoga, putting effort into wakefulness. The enlightened mind, they say, is the awakened mind. So we go against the habit of always sleeping. We have to rest, of course, but sleep little, eat little, talk little makes you very mindful. Doesn't mean to say you always have pleasant experiences and pleasant feelings. If you sleep a little bit less than you would like, your mind sometimes reacts to that and you get grumpy. But then you can observe the grumpiness. Where's that coming from? It's the mind not getting what it wants. You teach it to be mindful. Or when we meditate, often there's a bit of pain in your legs or your back. So you teach yourself to let go of any aversion or irritation to the pain. And you cultivate goodwill, compassion and tolerance to balance the mind and help you through. If you have a lot of goodwill, then even if you sleep a little bit less than you would like, It doesn't matter. Maybe use your time to do something good, to meditate, or learn some chanting, or help out, do some service in the monastery and help out. If your mind is in a good place, good space, then it doesn't matter if you sleep a bit less or eat a bit less. And when you see some nice food that you would like, and you think of somebody else, maybe you say, oh, I'll give up that food to the next monk, the next person in line. So even though you're not getting what you want, your mind has some kindness and some renunciation, some wholesome qualities, so it doesn't matter too much. And these are the kind of things you learn as a monk. You're learning to train in developing wholesome qualities and abandoning the unwholesome. It's not always easy, but very rewarding, because your mind becomes more independent from its old habits and attachments. This is the mind that is becoming the mind of a monk or a nun, ordained on the inside. As a layperson, you can do this as well. You don't have to follow every desire and every attachment. You can practice teaching yourself to be restrained, be mindful, limit things, let go of things. This is what we need to do to learn to see the Dhamma. And the Buddha said this body and mind, what we call the 5 khandhas, it's like a heavy burden that we carry around because of our cravings and desires and attachments. We don't realize it half the time, but we're always attached to this body. And then every thought, feeling, perception that comes up, we grasp at it as a self, and it feeds more desire, more attachment. So the mind is never quite still, never quite peaceful, never quite happy. Because we take these very heavy, weighty things, body and mind, as self. When we practice the Dhamma, bringing up mindfulness, seeing through the sense of self, to see the impermanent nature of 5 khandhas, then the mind is released, experiences a certain lightness, happiness of letting go. And that's something we need to learn as we practice to enjoy and find happiness in letting go. In the way of delusion is to hold on, to cling on, identify with every thought as me, mine, myself, every feeling, and the body itself, always clinging on. And this is what weighs the mind out, it feels heavy. So we need to find a way to enjoy letting go, giving up, letting go. Actually find happiness in that. And this is the way of the noble ones like Venerable Ajahn Kalyano. He understood this point from hearing the Buddha's first teaching. He began enjoying letting go. The unenlightened mind doesn't want to risk it, letting go. You feel like you lose something if you let go. So we like to cling on to every thought, every view, every opinion, every feeling as self. But then we get tangled up and we suffer. We cling on to every bit of pleasure that we can seek in this world, every object, every possession. If we follow our attachments to their logical conclusion, it basically will try and own everything we can have in this world so that we can maximize our pleasure. Every pleasant sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. If we should follow every craving and attachment, every desire and wanting we have in the mind, there'll be no end to it. Basically, we'll try and own the whole world so we can have everything we want. But still we wouldn't be happy. But that's what we do half the time. We haven't seen the suffering of it, the heaviness, the suffering of attaching and identifying to every desire, every thought, every perception. When you practice letting go, you're going in the other direction. You're saying, however much pleasure there is, it's temporary, it's not self. Therefore, I don't need to hold on to it. I can afford to let it go. I can risk letting go. And we actually begin finding happiness in letting go. Then the mind inclines more towards simplicity. If you look at the Buddha, his whole life, he just had his monk's bowl, robes, shaven head. Those were his possessions. His robes weren't even good quality cloth. That's what we call bangsakula cloth. Cloth that's cast off cloth from discarded cloth from people that they'd thrown away, or even from corpses that they'd wrap around corpses that monks would collect up. The very opposite of accumulating wealth and power and fame and fortune and all the things of the world that people tend to run after, assuming they'll bring them satisfaction and happiness. He went in the opposite way. He found happiness in letting go. He could have had a lot of wealth, all the best things that India had to offer in those days, but he didn't. He let it go. And he found joy in letting go. When you let go on the outside, then the mind on the inside becomes a little bit brighter and happier, less concerned, less confused, less bound up with the world. And so you get this inner joy, what we call niramisa sukha. The joy, the happiness of letting go, of just being with the Dhamma itself, with knowledge and clarity of the way things are. The happiness of sila, virtuous conduct, the happiness of samadhi, peace from meditation, stillness, the happiness of insight, in non-confusion, non-delusion, just knowing the way things are, brings the mind happiness. If you know things are impermanent, then you don't get stressed or suffer with that fact. If you know this body is impermanent, it's getting older, one day we have to let it go through death, then you don't get stressed by the thought of old age, sickness and death. You just know that's the way it is. If you know all the possessions you could have in this world are impermanent, not self, you don't get stressed by letting go of them. All the people you love, you know one day they won't be there. If you know that, you have clear knowledge and vision of the impermanence of yourself and other people, then you let go. When we don't let go, we cling on. So we fill our minds with a craving and attachment, so we suffer. It's like people when they come to the monastery and they say, oh, I got something to ask a question about. You say, what is it? They say, oh, it's a family problem. Everybody knows instantly, oh, family problem. Because it's the weight of the attachment, isn't it? Because you live together as family, you have parents, children, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunties. Family problems are always weighty, heavy problems, because they're an extension of your 5 khandhas. Few people have strangers' problems. We do have problems with strangers, but not many, and it's not so weighty, is it? Because you're strangers, you don't know them. Family, though, you have family problems, that means a heavy weight on your mind. People say, oh, what am I going to do about my mum, my dad, my child, my brother, my sister, my this, my that? Sometimes it's friends, but more often it's family. Even more than that is ourselves. Self-problems. Me, mine, myself. My problems. My thoughts, my feelings, my pain, my illness, my this, my that. The heaviest feeling of all is this set of 5 khandhas, body and mind. Ajahn Chah compared it to a ball of red-hot iron. He said, wherever this body and mind, wherever you look at, wherever you touch, wherever you are attached to it, it's like a ball of red-hot iron. It's hot. It burns you because you attach with ignorance. In red-hot iron, there's no cool bit. If you ever see a piece of iron put in a fire and it's become red-hot, it's not like there's one bit you can touch that's cool and you can pick it out of the fire. It's all hot. Ajahn Chah reminded us of that. It's all hot. In the body, the feelings, the thoughts, the perceptions, sense consciousness is all hot. There's no refuge in it, really. The refuge is in the Dhamma. If you take the Dhamma as your refuge, you're going to the place of non-attachment, not identifying with the khandhas as self. But what we tend to do when we're not seeing the truth is we take refuge in our body and our feelings and thoughts and all the things we can have in this world. And so we suffer because they're impermanent and they can't bring us lasting happiness. So you could say the day the Buddha gave the first teaching, the full moon day in July, Asalaha, it's a day we celebrate non-attachment. We celebrate letting go. Maybe they should introduce this to the calendar. In the calendar we have a celebration day of letting go. Because we need to be reminded of this. We need to remind ourselves of it, need other people to help remind us, certainly in the beginning of our practice. As a Buddhist monk, you shave your head. It's letting go. You let go of your hair. Let go of all hairstyles for the rest of your life. You don't have to worry about styling your hair anymore. So it's a release, isn't it? Letting go is like that. Whether it's letting go of your hairstyle, letting go of fashion, you only have one fashion, set of robes. Letting go of food, so you just have alms food. Letting go of accommodation and furnishings, just have a hut in the forest. Letting go actually leads to release. Happiness allows the mind to draw inwards and experience the peace, the peaceful, bright, happy mind of letting go. It's something you have to practice because we keep falling back into delusion. So as long as there's doubt there, and then the mind sometimes expresses that doubt. Oh, is letting go really the way? Maybe I should just cling on a little bit more. And we go back to square one, and then we find ourselves stressed again, suffering again. Oh, where did I go wrong? I was clinging on again. Maybe even opinions and views about the Dhamma. So even Buddhist monks get caught into views and opinions. What's right, what's wrong, what's the right explanation, who knows, who doesn't know. But the taste of Dhamma, the real taste of the Dhamma is one of letting go, release, liberation. Just like the Buddha said, the taste of the Dhamma is just one taste, the taste of liberation. Just as the ocean has one taste, it's salty. The taste of the Dhamma is liberating. So tomorrow we have ordination, new monks and novices in the monastery. So it's a time to celebrate going forth, leaving the lay life for the homeless life of a bhikkhu. But even if you're not able to ordain, you can still practice ordaining your heart. Commit, your heart to the practice of developing this path for letting go. So I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.